The data chip was small, smaller than a claw tip. Ambassador Orvith of the Sularai turned it between two of his 6 fingers and looked at it the way one looks at something that should not exist. The Terran envoy had placed it on the council table without a word. No ceremony, no trembling hands, just set it down, the way someone sets down a key they have been carrying for a very long time. Her name was Dara Solano. She was not tall, not imposing, not dressed in anything ceremonial. She wore a plain gray uniform with a single silver pin above her left chest. She sat with her hands flat on the table and looked at the room the way someone looks at a problem they have already solved. The chamber of the Galactic Conclave held 17 species. Sularai elders with their long, translucent skulls. The 8-armed Dreen diplomats shifting in their fluid tanks. The Corsu representatives whose bodies crackled with low static when they were nervous. And right now, the static in the room was loud enough to feel on the skin. At the head of the chamber, Orvith cleared his throat. "Ambassador Solano," he said carefully. "The Dravhari ultimatum was issued 14 hours ago. The compliance window closes in 58 hours. The Conclave has drafted a response on Terra's behalf, a request for phased withdrawal from the border colonies, to be completed over 90 days, with compensation negotiations to follow." He paused. He expected relief. He expected gratitude. Dara looked at him. "We have already responded," she said. The room did not make noise. It made the absence of noise, which is worse. Orvith set the data chip into the reader at the center of the table. The projection bloomed above them. A single line of text, white on black, in Terran standard script with conclave translation underneath. It read, "The Terran fleet is already moving." The Dreen diplomat knocked over his fluid tank. No one helped him. Everyone was reading the words again, as if reading them a second time might make them say something different. "Already moving," repeated Councillor Feth of the Corsu, his body crackling loud enough to hear across the room. "Moving where? You have no fleet capable of—" "We have a fleet," Dara said. Her voice was not hard, it was simply flat, factual, like someone stating that water is wet. "It has been capable for some time." Orvith felt something move behind his eyes, something cold. He had read the Terran military assessments. Every intelligence brief the Conclave possessed on humanity described a species with modest planetary defense systems, a small orbital patrol force, no deep space combat doctrine worth noting. Humanity had been a member of the Conclave for 60 years and had never once requested a seat on the War Council. They asked for trade routes. They asked for medical exchange programs. They asked once for assistance cataloging a newly discovered nebula. They had never asked for anything that sounded like preparation for war. "The Dravhari," Orvith said slowly, "have 400 warships in their advance fleet alone. They have not lost an engagement in 4 centuries. Ambassador, if you have misread this situation." "We have not misread it." Dara folded her hands. "We have been reading it for a very long time, longer than the Conclave has been reading us." Someone near the back of the chamber spoke, the Hesari observer, a young one who perhaps had not yet learned when to stay quiet. "How large is this fleet, the one that is already moving?" Dara looked at him for a moment. "Large," she said. The Hesari sat back down. It was then that the proximity alarms began, not in the chamber, throughout the station. A low, rolling tone that the station system used to indicate sensor anomalies in deep space. The kind of tone that usually meant a rogue asteroid or a stellar flare. The Conclave's chief sensor operator appeared on the wall screen, his face the color of old ash. "Ambassador Orvith," he said, "we are receiving reports from relay stations across sectors 7 through 14. Long-range sensors are going dark." "Interference?" Orvith asked. "No, sir." The operator's voice was careful in the way that voices become careful when the speaker is trying not to panic. "The sensors are functioning. They are simply not detecting anything. The signals they were tracking have disappeared. Ships, debris fields, background objects gone, as if something is standing between us and the data. Another operator's voice cut in from off-screen. Sector 19 array is dark. Sector 22. Sector 9 is. The screen flickered. Orvith turned slowly to look at Dara Solano. She had not moved. She had not looked at the screen. She was looking at him with the particular patience of someone who has waited a long time to sit in this exact chair and say exactly what she was about to say. "The Dravhari asked us to surrender our colonies," she said quietly. "We wanted them to understand what that request cost them." Orvith opened his mouth. The lights across the station dimmed once. Not a failure. A wash of energy as every sensor array on the station tried to process what was now appearing on long-range scans across 11 sectors simultaneously. Thousands of ships, all of them dark until this moment, all of them Terran. All of them already there. The chamber fell into a silence so complete that Orvith could hear his own heartbeat, strange and fast, and the very soft sound of Dara Solano exhaling. Not with relief, not with triumph, but with the quiet release of someone who has been holding something very heavy for a very long time and has finally, at last, been allowed to put it down. For 400 years, Commander Vard had never been surprised in battle. He had won engagements against species with faster ships, stronger weapons, larger numbers. He had won them because the Dravhari understood one truth that most civilizations refuse to accept, that war is not about power, it is about will. And no species in the known galaxy had more will than his. He was reviewing supply manifests when his sensor chief stopped speaking mid-sentence. Vard looked up. The officer, a veteran named Das, steady-handed and cold-nerved, was staring at his console the way a person stares at something that should be showing one thing and is showing another. "Report," Vard said. Das did not answer immediately. He ran the scan again, then a third time. Then he turned slowly in his seat and looked at his commander with an expression Vard had never seen on his face before. "Sir," Das said, "the sector is full." "Full of what?" "Ships." Vard crossed the bridge in 4 strides and looked at the readout himself. The display showed the surrounding space in false color, blue for clear, red for mass contact. The screen was red, not spotted with it, not streaked. Entirely, completely, deeply red from edge to edge, from deep range to close range, as if space itself had turned to iron. "These readings are false," Vard said. "Run the calibration check." "Already ran it twice, sir. The sensors are clean." "Then it is interference, some Terran trick." "The mass shadows have engine variants, sir, individual rotation. They are not ghosts, each one is a separate ship." Das paused. "I am counting." He stopped. He tried again. "The counter cannot give a stable number, it keeps climbing." Vard straightened. He looked at the red screen for a long moment. Outside the viewport, space looked exactly as it always had. Black, empty, quiet. And that was the thing that struck him then, struck him somewhere behind the chest, cold and sudden, because the sensors were saying that space was not empty and had not been for some time. Whatever was out there had been out there without engines running, without active signals, without a single emission that his fleet had picked up across 3 days of advanced travel. They had been sitting in the dark, waiting. How long, Vard said carefully, could a fleet hold cold dark protocol? No engines, no active sensors, full emissions blackout. Das understood the question. For most known species, hours, perhaps a day with extreme discipline, the crew's stress alone. How long for humans? Das was quiet. Vard already knew. The answer was going to be something he did not like. "There are consumption records in the Conclave database," Das said slowly. "Humans conducted cold dark exercises, always listed as defensive drills, Logged durations. He pulled the records and his voice became very still. 91 days, sir. Their longest logged drill was 91 days of full cold dark, running on minimum life support. 400 warships, and Vard felt very small. He sent the emergency burst to the homeworld. Simple. 5 words in Dravhari command cipher. They were already here. He did not know yet what else to say. He was still building the sentence in his mind. The one that explained how a civilization the Dravhari had dismissed as soft and untested had managed to move a fleet of incalculable size into position without triggering a single sensor alarm across any of the 17 conclave monitoring networks. Then the Terran fleet powered on. Not one ship at a time, not in sequence, all of them simultaneously as if a single hand had thrown a single switch, and the lights came on across a region of space the size of a solar system. Vard saw it through the viewport before the sensors could process it. A glow that began at the horizon of his vision and expanded, not in one direction, not from one point, but from everywhere at once, as if the stars themselves had decided to move closer. Blue-white engine burn. Thousands of points of light, steady and even, all accelerating at the same rate, all turning in the same direction. Toward his fleet. The comm channel opened, not a weapon, not a warning shot, not a demand. Just a transmission, clean and clear, on the universal frequency that every ship of every species used for identification. A calm voice, human female. Dravhari Advance Fleet, this is the Terran Combined Force. You are not being targeted at this time. We are giving you this moment to consider what you asked of us. Take it. That was all. No list of demands, no declaration of war, no countdown, just consideration. As if the Terran fleet was not an act of war but a question, aimed at 400 Dravhari warships like a finger pressed gently to a chest. Do you understand now? Vard stood on his bridge surrounded by officers who were waiting for his order, and he discovered that the order he had spent 400 years of Dravhari military history training to give, advance, engage, destroy, had become, in the span of 60 seconds, the most dangerous sentence he had ever considered speaking. He said nothing. The Terran fleet continued to burn toward him, slow, patient, perfectly even, like something that had rehearsed this approach so many times it no longer needed to think about it, like something that had been ready to do exactly this for a very, very long time. Das looked at him. "Sir," he said quietly, "your orders." Vard watched the light grow in the viewport and understood, with a certainty that settled into his bones and stayed there, that he was the wrong species to be asking that question right now. There is a sound that occurs when 10,000 engines ignite together. It does not travel through space. Space carries nothing. But inside every hull in the Terran combined force, every crew member felt it through the floor, through the chair, through the bones, a deep, slow vibration that meant the waiting was over. On the bridge of the INS Endurance, Fleet Admiral Gregor Solis was reading a report. Not a tactical brief, not a battle projection, a census record old, flagged, pulled from the civilian archive and attached to no formal document. It listed the names of the people who had lived on Meyeril Station before the Dravhari raided it 11 years ago. It listed, in a separate column, how many had survived. He read it the way he always read it, quietly, until the end. Then he closed it. Admiral, his weapons officer Petra, spoke from her station without turning around. She had been running system checks for the last hour, not because the systems needed checking, but because her hands needed something to do. The advance fleet is holding position. They have not engaged. They won't, Gregor said. Not yet, they're thinking. About what? About whether they made a mistake. He set down the report and looked at the main screen, the tactical overlay, red contacts representing 400 Dravhari ships arrayed ahead of them like a wall someone had built and was now reconsidering. The answer is yes. They'll arrive at it eventually. Petra turned then just slightly and looked at him. She was 26 years old. She had joined the combined force because she believed in diplomacy, in the Conclave's framework, in the idea that humanity's future lay in careful, patient, multilateral cooperation. She still believed most of that. The part she had stopped believing was the part where patience meant silence, while other people decided how much of humanity was acceptable to lose. She had seen the mayoral census, too. Gregor had made sure every officer in the fleet had. "How long have we been building this?" she asked, not accusatory, genuinely asking. Gregor was quiet for a moment. "The first hull was laid down 212 years ago," he said. "A single ship, kept in a construction bay on the dark side of an uninhabited moon. The project was called Maintenance." Petra stared at him. "The second ship," he continued, "was started 18 years later, then 4 more, then 12. Every generation added more, improved the ones already built, trained the crews in cold, dark protocol, all of it logged as routine, exercises, drills, maintenance cycles." He paused. "The Conclave never asked hard questions about our maintenance budget. Why didn't we use them earlier, after the Reth Corridor attacks, after Dravhari raided the Selen convoys?" "Because we were not ready," Gregor said. "Not in ships. We had enough ships 20 years ago. We were not ready in here." He touched his chest, not dramatically, just briefly, as a man touches something that explains itself. "If we moved too early from anger, we would have fought like a species that was angry. We needed to move when we were certain, when every option had been tried, when the only remaining question was how, not whether." From below in the engineering bay, Chief Engineer Halst transmitted a short status check in the clipped shorthand that old fleet crew used. "Systems green, drive stable." He had been an engineer on cold dark operations for 30 years. He had spent a combined total of 9 years of his life sitting in near-total darkness, running on recycled air, waiting. He had never once complained about it. When junior crew asked him how he managed it, he told them, "Think about why you're waiting. It gets easier." Petra turned back to her console. On her screen, the Dravhari formation was holding. Barely. The sensor read on their ships showed elevated output, engines fluctuating, the signature of a fleet that was arguing with itself. "They're going to fight," she said. "Some of them," Gregor agreed. "The ones who have never been on the losing side of anything. They won't be able to accept this without trying. And when they try..." Gregor looked at the main screen, at the weight of what they had built over 2 centuries, the patience of a species that had been called weak so often it had learned to find the word almost funny. "Then we show them what patience looks like from the other side," he said. He did not raise his voice. He did not stand from his chair. He opened the fleet-wide channel, the one that went to every ship simultaneously, from the Endurance down to the smallest escort at the edge of the formation, and he spoke 2 words. "Advance steady." That was all. No speech about history. No words about sacrifice or glory. 2 words, the same 2 words that every Terran fleet commander before him had been trained to say when the moment finally arrived, because every generation of commanders before him had hoped they would be the one to say it, and had prepared for that possibility with the particular devotion of people who knew they might not live to see it. The Terran combined force moved forward, slow, even, as if it had always been heading here and the last 200 years had simply been the approach. On the Dravhari side, Vard watched it come. He gave his order. And the last mistake the Dravhari advance fleet ever made was believing that the thing moving toward them could be stopped by anything they had brought with them. The first thing the Dravhari learned was that Terran ships did not behave like ships. They behaved like one ship. 400 Dravhari vessels opened fire in coordinated salvo, the standard opening doctrine that had broken every enemy formation the Dravhari had faced across 400 years of undefeated war. The fire was precise. The fire was devastating. It would have ended most engagements before they began. The Terran vanguard absorbed it and kept moving. Not without damage. 3 ships in the front line took heavy hits, armor shredded, hulls breached, systems going dark in the sensor readout. But they did not stop. They did not scatter. The ships behind them closed the spacing, the flanks tightened, and the whole formation continued its advance at the same steady pace, as if the salvo had not happened, as if damage was simply a condition to be processed and not a reason to reconsider. Aboard the INS Endurance, Petra was running fire coordination across 96 ships in her sector. There was no emotion in her hands. There was too much to track for emotion. Range data, shield harmonics, target vectors, ordnance load, it all flowed across her console in clean lines of numbers, and she worked through it with the focus of someone who had trained for this specific moment since her 2nd year at the Fleet Academy. She found a gap in the Dravhari left formation, a cluster of lighter escorts trying to swing wide and flank, and she flagged it for the Endurance's secondary batteries without saying a word. The guns moved. The escorts stopped being a problem. Their rear line is pulling back, her sensor partner, a quiet man named Rowan, said from across the station. They're trying to regroup, Petra said. Don't let the left flank breathe. Rowan relayed the order. The left flank did not breathe. Aboard his flagship, Vard was discovering something that his 4 centuries of doctrine had never prepared him for. The Dravhari won battles by outmaneuvering, by finding angles, by splitting formations, by making the enemy respond to them. But the Terran fleet did not respond to him. It simply advanced, coordinated and terrible, and every adjustment he made to his formation was countered not by a Terran reaction, but by a Terran action that had apparently already accounted for the adjustment before he made it. They had modeled this. He understood that now, watching his right wing collapse for the 3rd time in 20 minutes. They had modeled every move he would make, every doctrine in the Dravhari playbook, because all of that information had been available in the Conclave database for decades, and the Terrans had apparently been studying it. He had never once studied them. The cruiser on Sector 4 is still firing, Das reported, his voice stripped of everything but fact. Vard looked at the readout. The cruiser, hull designation INS Ardent, was listed as critically damaged. One full side of the ship was venting atmosphere. Its engine output had dropped by 60%. By any standard of any navy he knew, that ship was out of the fight. The INS Ardent was firing full broadside. Not distress fire, not random fire, coordinated, targeted, precision fire, as if the crew had noted the damage and decided it was not relevant to the task at hand. One of Vard's captains opened a direct channel. "Commander, we cannot break their line. We have lost 40 ships. The enemy has lost 7. This is not a battle, it is a demonstration," Vard said. He closed the channel. At the Conclave station, Ambassador Orvith watched the live tactical feed in a silence that had swallowed the entire chamber. He had watched the first salvo. He had watched the Terran ships absorb it. He had watched everything that followed with the growing recognition of a man who spent 60 years studying a subject and just realized he read every source wrong. He had thought humanity was patient because they were afraid. They were patient because they were ready, and they had decided, somewhere long ago, that they would not be the ones to start this. They would wait until history would record without argument that they had tried everything else first. Orvith reached for his stylus and began writing the emergency recommendation he had delayed for 3 days. The one that acknowledged, in formal conclave language, that the intelligence assessments of Terran military capability had been not merely incorrect but comprehensively, catastrophically wrong. On the tactical feed, the Dravhari formation finally broke. Not all at once, some ships held, still firing, but the cohesion was gone. Ships were peeling away, running for open space. And then the Terran fleet did something none of Orvith's analysts could immediately explain. It stopped pursuing. The retreating Dravhari ships were allowed to run. The Terran line held at its position, steady and unmoving, as the scattered enemy ships burned away into deep space. Orvith stared at the feed. One of his analysts said slowly, "They let them go." "Yes," Orvith said. "Why?" Orvith set down his stylus. He thought about the data chip. He thought about Dara Solano's flat, patient voice. He thought about what kind of species chooses at the moment of total victory not to pursue and what that sends. Because destroying them, he said, would only prove humans can win a battle. He looked at the screen. Letting them go prove something worse. What? That humans decide when the battle ends. He picked up his stylus again. That is not a military capability. That is a warning. The feed showed the Terran fleet, unmoving, watching the Dravhari remnants flee, patient, vast, and entirely in control of something far more dangerous than firepower. The terms of every future negotiation in the known galaxy had just changed. No one in the conclave chamber said anything for a very long time. The Terran fleet stopped at the border and said nothing. No transmission, no ultimatum, no list of demands broadcast across the open channels that every conclave monitoring station was watching. The fleet simply held a wall of ships stretching across the entry corridor to Dravhari home space, and waited, engines burning low, weapons cold, as if they had all the time in the galaxy and were perfectly comfortable using it. Inside the Dravhari ruling chamber, the argument had been going on for 6 hours. High Warlord Dren, who had held his seat for 30 years on the strength of a military that had never lost, slammed his fist on the council table and demanded a second engagement. He cited numbers. He cited doctrine. He cited 4 centuries of Dravhari supremacy as if history were a weapon he could point at a wall of Terran warships and expect it to matter. General Sale sat across from him and said nothing. She had pulled the battle data from the engagement. She had run the projections. She had looked at the loss ratios, the engagement duration, the moment the Terran fleet had chosen to stop, not because they ran out of weapons or will, but because they decided to. She had highlighted that moment in her report in red and underlined it 3 times. She let Dren talk. When he finished, she put her report on the table. "We cannot win," she said. It was not an opinion. It was a conclusion the way the end of a calculation is a conclusion. Not this engagement, not a second one. They have more ships than our initial estimates suggested by a factor of 8. Their damage tolerance in combat is outside anything in our strategic models, and they stopped. She tapped the underlined section. They chose to stop. That means they can choose to start again at any time, and we will have no warning, because we did not have warning the first time. Dren stared at her. "You are asking me to surrender. I am asking you to still be alive in a year." The silence in the chamber was the kind of silence that follows when the person you least want to be right turns out to be right. Outside, on an unofficial channel that Sale had spent 2 days quietly arranging through third-party relay systems, she transmitted a short message to Terran Combined Force Command. No formal headers, no encryption codes, just a name, a frequency, and 4 words: "I want to talk." The response came back in 11 minutes. 1 word: transmit. She had expected more conditions. A location demand, a conclave intermediary requirement, a security protocol. The humans had just said transmit, as if they trusted her enough already, or as if, and this possibility settled into her mind and stayed there. They already knew everything they needed to know about her and had simply been waiting for her to reach out. "General Sale," said the voice on the channel. It was calm, male, unhurried. "I am Fleet Admiral Solis. You can speak freely." She had prepared a speech, a formal opening, acknowledgments of the engagement, carefully hedged language about the political situation. She looked at her notes and put them aside. "What do you want?" she asked. A brief pause, not hesitation, consideration. "The colonies," Gregor said, Returned. Full withdrawal of Dravhari forces from all Terran border territories within 30 days. Another pause, and an acknowledgement on record that the ultimatum was a mistake. Sale closed her eyes. The acknowledgement would cost more than the withdrawal. The withdrawal was territory. The acknowledgement was history. And if we agree to this, we go home, Gregor said simply. Your space remains your space. We will not occupy. We will not install monitoring stations. We will not demand tribute or conclave testimony or a seat at any table we haven't been invited to. A short silence. We are not interested in your territory, General. We never were. She believed him. That was the strange part. She had spent 3 days preparing to not believe whatever the humans said, and she believed him immediately and completely. The way you believe someone who has demonstrated they have the power to take everything you have, and chosen not to. I will need time to bring the council, she said. You have it, Gregor said. We are not going anywhere. The channel closed. At the conclave station, the request queue on Dara Solano's console had reached 47 entries. 47 separate species, member states and independent observers all requesting emergency diplomatic audience with the Terran delegation. Some were panicked. Some were apologetic. Several were offering things, trade concessions, exclusive routes, military cooperation agreements, that they had spent decades refusing to put on the table. Dara looked at the queue. She thought about the 60 years humanity had spent asking for basic protections and being told to wait. She opened the queue and sorted it by date of first request, oldest first. The first entry was the Hesari observer who had asked his question in the council chamber and received a one-word answer. She started there. She was going to take her time. She had learned from humanity's long practice that patience was not a delay, it was the thing itself. On the main screen behind her, the tactical feed showed the Terran fleet holding its position at the Dravhari border, steady and still and infinite, saying nothing that could not be said more clearly by simply remaining exactly where it was. The signing took 4 hours. Not because the terms were complicated, they were not. Not because Sale fought them, she didn't. It took 4 hours because Dren had to be removed from the council chamber first, which required a formal vote, which required 3 procedural objections from his allies, which required the document to sit on the table while the Dravhari ruling council did what ruling councils do when they have already lost and are working through the stages of accepting it. By the time the mark was made, the Dravhari withdrawal from Terran border territories had already begun. Sale had ordered it before the signing. She did not explain why to the council. She was done explaining things to people who should have seen them coming. The Terran combined force received confirmation at 04:12 fleet time. Gregor read it. He forwarded it to the fleet channel with no additional message. Then he opened the log and wrote 4 words. We remember, they will too. He closed the log. Set course for home, he said. Petra heard the order from her station and felt something she had not felt in weeks, not relief, not triumph. Something quieter. The particular feeling of a thing completed correctly after a long time of doing it wrong. She had believed in diplomacy once, and she still did, but she understood now that diplomacy without the credible, demonstrated, irrefutable proof of consequence was not diplomacy. It was hope wearing diplomacy's clothing. And hope was not enough when the people across the table had 400 warships and 4 centuries of habit. She watched the course projection appear on the main screen, the long arc home, back through the sectors where the fleet had held cold dark for months, back past the relay stations that were coming back online one by one as Terran ships ceased their signal blocking, back toward Earth and its gray-blue light. Halst, down in engineering, transmitted a status update in the old fleet shorthand. Then he added a single line that was not shorthand, not technical, not part of any standard format. Good war, good people, going home. Petra read it and said nothing, because there was nothing to add to that. At the conclave station, Orvith sat in the empty chamber long after everyone else had left. The screens were still on. The tactical feed showed the Terran fleet's new heading away from Dravhari space, away from the border, a long, clean line of drive signatures pointing toward the inner systems, going home as promised, as stated. Without occupation, without monitoring posts, without any of the demands that any other species, the Dravhari, the Sularii, the Dreen, everyone he knew, would have made from a position of such overwhelming advantage. He pulled up the official conclave record and began to type. He had written many records in his career, accounts of conflicts, negotiations, first contacts, treaty violations, and resolutions. He knew the language careful, balanced, passive, the language of an institution that prided itself on seeing all sides clearly. He deleted 3 drafts. On the 4th, he stopped trying to be balanced. He wrote what he had seen. He wrote about the data chip. He wrote about the sensors going dark. He wrote about the battle, the formation that held, the ship that kept firing, the fleet that stopped pursuing because it decided to. He wrote about Sales, Channel, and Gregor's terms and the 4 hours of signing and the course set for home. And at the end, he wrote the sentence he had been turning over in his mind since the moment the chamber lights dimmed and the galaxy lit up with Terran engine burn. They were not sleeping. They were waiting. There is a difference. We did not understand that difference. We do now. Every future member of this conclave, every civilization that joins this body and sits in these chairs, will read this record first before treaties, before trade agreements, before anything, and they will understand. The humans tried the table. They tried it for 60 years. They are still willing to try it. But they are also, and have always been, willing to do something else entirely. That is not a threat. It is a fact. And facts, unlike threats, do not require repetition. He submitted the record. Outside the station's viewport, the last edge of the Terran fleet's drive trail was fading, the burn dissipating into background radiation, becoming invisible against the stars the way the fleet itself had once been invisible, patient and dark and waiting. In a week, the border colonies would be restored. In a month, the conclave would hold the first formal session to redesign its own charter, the one that had allowed an empire to issue ultimatums, while the body meant to prevent exactly that, drafted compliance documents for the target. In a year, the Dravhari High Warlord Dren would be removed from his position by a vote of his own council, replaced by Sale, who would spend the next decade quietly rebuilding her civilization's relationship with the rest of the galaxy. In 60 years, a young Hesari diplomat would read Orvith's record as part of his orientation to the conclave. He would read it twice. Then he would look out the window at the stars and think carefully about what it meant to underestimate the species that had been sitting in the dark for 2 centuries, not because they had to, but because they had chosen to wait until the moment was exactly right. Then he would go to his first session, sit in his chair, and say nothing unnecessary. He had learned that from the best.